Hello everyone and welcome to the SPIB webinar. My name is Luke Infinger and I'm a marketing consultant for SPIB. I'm here with Chuck Miceli and he is the e-learning consultant for SPIB. In just a minute we're going to kick off the webinar, but I wanted to go over how we will do questions. We're going to save the question and answer time for the end of the webinar. But during the webinar, if you have questions, just be sure to chat those over. We'll take them in the order we receive the questions. In the event we don't get to your question, just email that to chuck.miceli@spib.org. That's M-I-C-E-L-I. And so I think that's it. Chuck, I'm going to hand it over to you and we will get going.
I just want to say thanks to everyone. I know you're all very busy and I appreciate your time. There's a lot of material to go over here, so I'm going to speak rather quickly. And as Luke said, we'll save the questions for the end. Some of you know who I am, some of you don't. I worked for SPIB for about 18 years as an inspector and a district supervisor. I quit SPIB in 1998 to produce the first version of this course. It was a computer-based course called ALEX. And the last 5 years or so, I've been very anxious to try to get the course improved and put up online. It offers a lot of benefits, a lot more benefits being online. One of the most important being that students can access it on an individual basis whenever they need it and from wherever they need it. Okay. Prior to leaving SPIB, most of the training that occurred at the mills I did during inspections or during special training visits. And it might take 4 to 8 months, sometimes as long as 9 or 10 months to get a grader trained. There was really no organized procedure for doing the training at the plant site. So I had this concept that building a training program and putting it on a computer might save a lot of time and effort. And so we undertook the challenge, and one of the most difficult aspects of learning to grade dimension lumber is learning how to grade the knots. You have to understand how the knots occupy the cross-section, what percentage of the cross-section they take up, and there's different ways the knots are measured depending on the shape and location of the knots. And during the training sessions that we had, we'd have to go through packs and packs of lumber to find particular knots. And during inspections, you might only find 1 or 2 type knots that a grader missed and only be able to give him feedback on a few pieces at a time. So this was very slow and time consuming. Okay, so the heart of the program, the initial start of it, was how we can train the graders on the knots much quicker and faster. So let me show you the first part of the program, which we call video knot tests. You can see here from the screen that we have a close-up on a knot defect, and the grader can replay that over again. This is one of the improvements we put in the new course. And once he looks at the knot, he can make his grade decision. Then if he's correct, we give him immediate feedback that he's correct. If he's incorrect, we also give him immediate feedback. Okay? Now when he's incorrect, he can actually go over here and check the rules. These rules come out of the lesson content on how to grade knots. And we can see here for 2x4 edge knots, we explain to them how to use a technique, which I'll get into later, called total measurement technique, where the grader actually compares what needs to be measured to the width of the piece and can make an accurate decision without actually measuring the knot. In this case, we've got 20-piece knot test here, and you know, some of the knots are quite easy to grade, and the percentage of pieces in each grade simulate what they actually see in the mill. There's more number 1 knots than number 3 knots, etc. I'm going to miss a few here so you can see at the end how the student's allowed to go back through the ones that he actually missed. And what is happening here is the student's actually able to train themselves. Okay, they can get a lot of feedback on the different knots that they're missing without having to have the inspector present. I'll see if I can get a few right here. Okay, when we're done with the test, we show a summary, how many they saw in each grade, how many they got correct, and how many they got incorrect. So you can identify where the student's having the most problems. He can himself, and the trainer can also. When they're finished, they can look at all the wrong ones, and we give them immediate feedback here again, telling them what grade it actually is, and he still has access to the rules to check. Okay, so this was like I said, the heart of the program. We eliminate a lot of the guessing and the inability to give feedback by having this available for them to practice on their own. Okay. The second most challenging thing for the grader to learn is the grading rules. Okay. Lost my course. Okay. The grading rules require lots of time and effort to memorize. So what we did here is we created a grading rules lessons, in this lessons for number 1, number 2, and number 3 lumber. We also created a shorthand rules card. And what we're trying to do is get the grader to memorize the worst case scenario for each defect or characteristic that they're studying. Okay? So, for example, here we're going to look at evaluating number 1 weighing. Okay, the maximum allowable weighing for number 1 is half the edge and a third the face. The part that's highlighted in the brown here is the part that's on the shorthand rules card, half the edge and a third the face, okay, for number 1. Then we actually have a picture here showing half the edge, and we give them a tip, and this is important. Half the edge is a 3/4 inch nailing edge. A penny is 3/4 of an inch. This is the type of information that they gain from the instructor. It's not in a book anywhere, okay? What we're doing is we're interpreting the rule, and this is the actual rule from the NGR. Weighing for number 1 is 1/4 the thickness and 1/4 the width, full length or equivalent on each face, provided the weighing not exceed half the thickness and 1/3 the face for 1/4 the length. That's a real mouthful, and that requires somebody to interpret that, okay? So what we do here is we try to interpret in plain language, incorporate a picture, add additional photos, and give them a shorthand rule that we're going to ask them to memorize, okay? And then they also have the rule book here available. So they have all the resources they need to study this rule on their own, all on one page, okay? Then we do the same thing for number 2. Again, the rule says that 2/3 of the edge is equal to a 1/2 inch nailing edge, okay? That's the tip from the instructor. And then number 3, the rule says we can have a 7/8 of the edge can be weighing. Most people don't know that 7/8 of the edge of 1.5 inches allows a 3/16 inch nailing edge. So this is the kind of information we incorporate here. And again, that's what we're trying to get them to focus on, a 3/16 inch nailing edge and 3/4 the face. This is the worst case scenario for the weight. Okay, now one of the improvements we made to the program is we incorporated the rules memorization and review drill into the rules lesson. So after they've studied what's 1, 2, and 3 limitations, they can actually go to the rules review, which is a standalone section also. And and memorize the rules for Wayne, okay? What we do is it almost works like flashcards. We present the rule in 3 different formats for number 1, number 2, and number 3. So there's 9 questions, and we do that twice. So they're all stacked in a deck like cards and randomized every time you take the drill. The requirement here, or the goal, is to answer all the questions correctly, okay? So sometimes we show a picture here. A penny will fit on half the edge. That was number 1. If it's correct, they can continue to go to the next one. 3/16" nail and edge and 3/4 the face. That's number 3. Half-inch nail and edge and half the face. That's going to be number 2. 3/16" nail and edge, 3/4 the face. That's number 3. Penny will fit on half the edge. That's number 1. And then sometimes we show the rule in the box and ask them to pick the grade. Half the edge and 1/3 the face. That's number 1. I'm hoping you're listening close enough to memorize the rule yourself. Okay. Now in this, there's 2 sets where we show the grade name and we show those shorthand rules that we're asking them to memorize, and we always present those in order to help facilitate the memorization, okay? Half the edge and 1/3 the face is number 1, then half-inch nail and edge is number 2, and a 3/16" nail and edge, 3/4 the face, number 3. So this one's number 1. It's almost a given if they understand that's the way it's being presented. Again, here, number 3 is going to be the 3rd one, 3/16" nail and edge, 3/4 the face. Number 1 is going to be the first one. Okay, we're back to a picture, half-inch nail and edge, that's number 2. And then we've got 3/16" nail and edge. So you get the idea. Now if they miss one, they can bail out of the test and immediately start over because they know their goal is to get all of these right. Okay. A lot of the graders don't even know or have techniques themselves for memorization. So this is really helpful. Helpful to anyone if you want to know the rules and be able to just rattle them off. 3/16" nail and edge, 3/4 the face, number 3. Half-inch nail and edge, half the face, number 2. And number 3, 3/16" nail and edge, 3/4 the face. Okay, so we got them all right. We say well done, and then you can save the score. Now this is important. All throughout the course, any test, quiz, or review the student takes, he has the option to save his score. So if he did poorly on it and he doesn't want to save the score, he can just click the next button and continue on. We did such a good job, we're going to save this score, okay? Now we can retake the exercise if we wanted to, okay? Then we're back into the lesson. We repeat the same thing for the next defect or characteristic. We're looking at skip here. Again, 1/16 of an inch deep is the most important thing in number 1, hit or miss. The rules are here, defining hit and miss. The shorthand rules are there. So you see the pattern here, and we go through all of the defects and characteristics that are necessary for learning 2-inch dimension lumber. Okay? Now the rules review and the knot tests are available once the student is logged in at any time. Okay? So he can go, he can, if he's an experienced grader and you just want to check to see if they know the rules or do an evaluation, you can send them right to the rules review section right here, or you can have them do the knot test anytime you want. Okay. All right. So once these 2 sections were completed, we decided to go ahead and build out the rest of the course. Okay, and there's a lot of information we have to communicate to a grader before he becomes very proficient. So I'm going to give you a quick overview now of some of the lesson content so you can see some of the features and how it works. Now, when a student first logs in, the status of all these lessons will be marked with a red X like this. Okay, when he completes the lesson and passes and gets a passing score, it'll show the status as complete, and it will open the next lesson for him. So the student's forced to go through the lesson content in order. And this is important because we're trying to build in a systematic manner all the information they need. That's one of the problems we have with training at the mill. We have to do it somewhat disorganized, and with a lot of repetition, going over the same information 2 and 3 times. And so this way here we build the training as we go through the course. Okay, the first lesson is a real short lesson just to get the student used to the system. Okay, it's an introduction to 2-inch dimension lumber. We explain what this course is and what it's for, and we talk about what the definition is of dimension lumber, and then we tell them how we've got different sections in the course and how we're going to learn about the grading rules, and that there's tools for lumber graders such as reading a tape measure and working with fractions, and we'll have lesson content on that. And then the core of the lesson content is really centered around the rules and how to measure the knots, and use this unique technique called the total measurement technique, where if you understand what parts of the knots have to be measured, you can compare that to the width of the piece and make the grade selection. Okay, then we tell them why lumber grading rules are important, how their decisions affect grade yield, and that the lumber grader is very important to the outcome of the financial outcome of the mill. We tell them that having a standardized lumber grading rules is important so everybody's on the same page regardless of where they're manufacturing the lumber. And we tell them that the total measurement technique will be useful for them to grade the knots on the chain without measuring it, and that lumber grading rules are not only important to the lumber grader, the mill, but also to the buyers and end users of lumber. Then they get a short quiz here at the end, and the way the quizzes work is they read the question. The first one here is what is the definition of dimension lumber? If they're correct, they can go on to the second question. What about this course will make you a better lumber grader? That was the total measurement technique. Second lesson here talks about the National Grading Rule System, ALS, the role of the grading agency, the role of the lumber inspector. And then the third lesson is really building on the fundamental terminology that we need to know, and understanding of how the lumber is manufactured, okay? We're going to talk about where dimension lumber comes from. We talk about the tree species. Oh, and anytime you see highlighted green words in the lesson content, the student can click on that, and it actually opens up the glossary and takes them to the definition. Okay. Oops. My internet connection's a little spastic here. Okay, then we go over basic terminology again. Sapwood, bark, heartwood, pith. We have additional photos to help illustrate the point. Heartwood and sapwood. And all of these words are also cross-linked to the glossary. We talk about how sawing creates defects in the lumber, where the weighing and the knots come from. Kill drying can cause defects. We talk about skips due to manufacturing defects. And then we talk about the size. What's the difference between the nominal and the dress size? It's important for them to know all the sizes of the lumber. We talk about the fact that the narrows are on a 1/2 inch less than nominal and the wides are 3/4 inch less than nominal. Again, it's all basic terminology to help us move forward faster as we go along. Okay, thickness, width, spring wood, summer wood, basic terminology. Then we talk about what dimension lumber is used for, and we have a summary there, and then a quiz. This quiz is multiple choice, and it works the same way with the remediation, taking you right back where the answer is, and the student has the option to save his scores. Okay, so once we get the introductory material laid out, we talk about all the definitions for the American Softwood Lumber Standard that are in the NGR. We break these out as natural, manufacturing, drying defects, and knots. So the first one are, what are all the natural defects? Okay, one of the powerful things about using a course like this is you don't have to search through packs and packs of lumber to find examples of compression wood or slope of grain, worm-eaten pitch. Okay, each of the NGR defects, the definitions are right out of the NGR, and then lots of pictures and photos to help illustrate. Worm-eaten pitch, shakes, timber breaks, and then that covers the natural defects in the NGR. After the natural defects, we look at the manufacturing defects. Okay, weighing being a manufactured defect, saw cuts, double skip, rabbited edge, double arbor mismatch, cross breaks, skips, planar tears, roller splits, torn grain, raised grain, loosened grain, lots of additional pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, okay? So you see how quickly you can actually deliver all this information to the student. And the way to do this normally is to deliver this information prior to doing the shed coaching. If they're going to actually grade on the chain or inspect lumber that's graded by machine, they really have to know all these defects. And the training, if you put them through the course first, your face-to-face training will go so much faster. Next, we cover the drying defects: twist, bow, crook, and cup. We show several different views of that, make sure we got a good understanding of the different types of warp. And again, this is just definitions. We're not asking them to learn how to grade any of these defects yet. That comes later. We talk about under-dried lumber and the fact that dimension can be staffed KD19 or KD15. If it's under-dried, we call it heavy lumber. And then we have a summary there. Okay? Then after those 3 lessons, we have one quiz to cover all the defects and characteristics. In this quiz, we incorporate a lot of images. And you can see here, oops, the same procedure. If they get the question wrong, they can go back and get the definition and put in the correct answer and retake the quiz as often as they want and save whichever scores they want to save. Okay, after covering that, then we have to talk about the terminology for knots. This is a lot of times is very confusing to the graders. Chuck, last time you came in, you said this was a decayed knot. Now you're calling it a firm knot, or you said it was an edge knot. So let's get all the definitions out of the way and make sure we understand the difference between sound knots and unsound knots. An unsound knot contains decay. These are pictures of sound knots. Here's your example of unsound knots. And then we talk about recognizing unsound knots versus a firm knot. We'll give examples of firm knots. Firm knots are solid across the face but contain early stages of decay, so we got several examples of that. Sound knots contain no decay. Then we look at all the definitions for the other knots. In the dimension, we got sound, firm, and case and pith knots. We show examples of each. And again, pictures are worth 1,000 words. You don't have to go through packs and packs of lumber to find the particular defect you're trying to teach. Okay. We also talk about knot spacing. Just because it's in the NGR, very seldom affects the dimension lumber. Then we have a multiple choice quiz at the end of that one. Okay. Now the next lesson is talking about the grades of number 1, number 2, and number 3. And what we're going to do here is just define the grade and its intended use and show how the defects and characteristics are limited differently for the different grades. So here's the definition of number 1 grade and what it's recommended for. And then we give 3 examples of wanes, splits, and knots. Edge knots, number 1 2x4 can be 1 inch. Splits equal to the width, and then here's the wane restriction. Then we go to number 2, and they can see, here's the definition of number 2, what it's intended for. And the knot sizes are bigger, okay? And they can see that split is longer, that's allowed, and the wane is more. So they can go back and forth and compare these, okay? And then we tell them there's lots of rules we're going to learn, but we're going to learn the rules later. We're going to give them a shorthand rules card, and we're going to give them several different techniques to help them memorize the rules, okay? Then these lessons on prime, select structural, and stud grade are very similar. These are optional lessons to the basic course. If your mill is producing these products, or if you want to learn about these products, you can add them to the basic course. The next section now, we're still building the tools we need to be able to learn how to grade this material. So one of the most important is math and measurement. And we didn't want to get too technical. This is sort of, I guess, what you call new math, okay? We're going to go with basic fractions for lumber graders. We're not going to talk about numerators and denominators. We want them to understand what the fractions are and the relative size in comparison to each other. These are the only fractions that are mentioned in the rules, basically, 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, and 3/4. Okay, we want to learn quickly how these apply to the wide face and the edge of the lumber. Okay, so we talk about what a fraction is. You cut something in half, you create 2 pieces. Each piece is equal. Each one's called 1 piece out of 2, or a half. And then we show how that applies to the board face. Then we talk about thirds. So lots of times graders have trouble with thirds. They don't understand thirds as well as the other fractions. We show examples. And then we show example how it applies to the wide face. How do you create a 1/4? You take 2 halves, cut each half in half, create 4 pieces. Each one's called a 1/4. Show how that applies to the face. And then we do 2/3. It takes a minute for the program to load. And then we look at 2/3 versus 1/3. And then we talk about 3/4. That's the last fraction we're concerned with teaching them. Okay? Then we're going to also learn how this applies to the edge, because we just went through the wide face. And this, we incorporate some interactivity in this lesson and some of the other lessons where you're not scored. You're just able to practice on your own. And this is important because a lot of times when we got several people out in the shed, a guy's embarrassed if he doesn't know what 2/3 is. Okay? So here he can practice here, and he goes, oh, let's see, one of these probably is 2/3. If he gets it wrong, it tells him it's wrong. If he gets it correct, it gives him immediate feedback that he's correct. And he can do that for every one of these. Okay? So this, again, encourages learning. The course was built to encourage learning, not as a testing tool. And when you introduce this to the trainee, it's a good thing to explain that to them. This is to help them learn quicker, more thoroughly, and more efficiently. Okay, we do the same thing on the wide face, try to find the right one. If you're wrong, you don't have anybody staring over you thinking you're stupid. Okay, so there's a summary here and then a short quiz. And again, we're trying to incorporate what we're learning into how the rules are going to be applied here. So it's not weighing, but it's the same concept here. This one's half the edge and a third the face. And this one's half the edge and looks like half the face. No, third the face. And then we've got 3/4 the edge and 3/4 the face. And then we do simple math. A half and a half, 2/4 plus 2/4, that all equals 1. 1/4 plus 1/4 is a half. Okay? So that's the idea there. Very simple math and just enough to be able to use it to apply to the lumber. Okay, and then after we get through that, we want to talk a little bit about proportion, because as a lumber grader, you're going to have to use the size of one object to judge the size of another. And again, we start to incorporate pictures that show the grading rules with knots and weighing. Okay, proportion, we say we can look at the size of one object and judge the size of another. Okay, we have some interactivity in this lesson also. We show if you know the thickness is 1.5 inches, you can roughly estimate that this cross-section here is 1 inch. Same with this one. If you know the lumber is 3.5 inches wide, half of it's going to be 1 3/4 inches. Okay, and we show how that could be used to grade a knot. If this is 3 3/4 to half here, that this knot is approximately 1 inch wide. Okay. Then we talk about comparing the size of knots in the cross section. Knot B is twice the size of knot A. Knot C is half the size of knot D. We give a lot of different examples there of different shapes of knots. For example, knot D is half the size of knot B. It's shaped very differently than these two, and this one's a rectangle, but it's still half the size. Okay. Then we also want to learn about dividing planes in half. This is going to come in handy when we're grading three-face knots. If the vertical plane is divided in 2/3, can we divide the horizontal plane the same way? Okay. And then here's another example of that. Okay. Then there's a summary at the end and a short quiz that incorporates, again, lots of pictures. Okay. Then after we've built this base of fractions and proportion, we're going to get into reading the tape measure. Now, people who don't read a tape measure all the time sometimes forget, okay? So we want to refresh them on how to read all the marks on the tape measure, and more importantly, we want them to understand the relative size of these fractions, so that when you tell them that knot's 3/16 of an inch too big, he knows, he has a visual in his mind about how big that is, okay? So we're going to look at a tape measure. We talk about the inch being about the size of your thumb. The half inch is about the size of the tip of your finger. Okay, we're going to look at the tape measure, and we're going to learn how to read all these marks down to a 1/16 of an inch. Okay, the tallest mark on the tape is always the largest fraction, which is the half-inch mark. When you cut something in two, you create two equal pieces. They can touch the tape to see the half-inch mark. And then we continue on here. To get quarters, you divide each half in half. And you can see the quarters here. 2/4 is a half. Then we got 4 spaces. We divide each one in half, create 8 spaces. Each one's an eighth. So now they're getting the idea about how big these fractions are relative to each other. And the last one we do is 16. If you have 8 pieces, cut each one in half, you're going to get 16 pieces. Each one's called a 16. Now, once they go through that, they can actually take and click on the slider. Again, interactivity within the lesson that they're not being tested on, not pressured. They can learn at their own pace and teach themselves, okay? And then after they do that, we want to see if they can add some of these fractions together. They can select an equation here and say 1/4 plus 1/4. He's not sure where that is. Nope. Try again. press the red and green fractions, you can see a quarter. Oh, okay, there's a quarter, and there's a quarter. Okay, that's a ½ inch. Okay, so lots of examples there. Get their confidence up and to make sure they understand exactly what they're doing with the fractions and reading the tape measure. Here they can actually just try to locate this quickly on the tape measure. Lots of examples. Okay, then there's a quiz at the end here, and we can actually test now to see if they've got it. They can take these tests over as many times as necessary. And some of it, we actually have tape measuring here that they can drag down and actually practice measuring on within the program. Okay. Okay, so after we've got those tools taken care of, we get into the real meaty lessons, which is how to grade the knots, okay? Since there's so much to learn here, we took the same approach as we did with the rest of the lesson content. Let's get the terminology right, build a firm foundation, and make sure we understand each part before we move on to the next, okay? The first thing we're going to do is definitions. We're going to define knot quality, knot shape, and knot location. Okay, the knot quality, we tell them is basically only an issue in number 1 and higher grades. Unsound, loose knots, and holes are graded the same, so knot quality is not a consideration number 2 and number 3. So often, even trained graders will think that decayed knots have to be smaller than sound knots in number 2 and number 3. Simply not the case. Okay. Then we're going to talk about different shapes of knots. Okay, what's a simple knot? And shows on one face, on the other face, and goes straight through the cross section, or it just shows on one face and goes through to the pit. That's how we define a simple knot. Then we talk about what a spike knot is, and then we get the definition of a 3-face knot. Then we talk also about a wide face spike knot. Okay, then we define knot location. We're going to talk about centerline knot, combination knot, edge knots, and displaceable knots. Again, just building step by step. Okay, what exactly is a centerline knot? Okay, what exactly is a spike knot, a simple knot, and an edge? Or these are all considered edge knots. Sometimes you'll be doing some training and say, "Well, Chuck, last time you were here, you told me this was a spike knot. Now you're calling it a edge knot." Well, some spike knots are edge, or all spike knots are going to be edge knots. Okay, this is where we get all the terminology straight and avoid a lot of confusion. Okay, then we talk about displaceable knots, what they are, what is a combination knot, and what is a cross section, and how we determine whether or not the knots are in the same cross section. Okay, then there's a quiz at the end of this lesson, and we incorporate some video clips here to see if they've got everything we learned. Okay, what best describes the shape of the knot in the video clip? They can actually play the clip. I guess that's a spike knot. And then we've got an edge knot here. Simple knot on the edge. Okay? So, then after we've defined knot quality, shape, and location, we're going to get into now how these knots are measured. Okay, this is a real important lesson. What we want to do is focus on the bright green line. We want them to understand that we're measuring the knots at a right angle across the width, and what we're concerned with is the cross section, not how big the knot is on the face. Okay, so we have an end view cross section here. That's where the focus has to be. And we show them, okay, measuring simple knots first. Show how to measure one face, measure the other face, add together and divide by 2. Plenty of examples on just this one page. Then again, we reiterate that the knot size is half of your total measurement. And then we give them practice. Again, in the course without testing. They can actually drag the tape, measure one side of the knot, measure the other side of the knot, add it together, and determine what the knot size is. And again, this encourages learning without the pressure of a test. Okay? Then we say measuring simple knots if they only occur on one face. What you do there is it's proportionate to the depth of penetration, which is just an estimate because we can't cut the lumber open. Okay? Then we say if the knot only goes halfway in, we're only going to use half the wide face for the total measurement. And then we get into measuring spike knots, follow the same procedure, show where the knot's going to be measured, what the cross-section looks like, and then give them practice, see if they've got it. Do the same thing here with this is important about the depth of penetration on the edge, how much the edge the knot occupies. If it only occupies a third the edge, we only need half the edge, we only need half the distance to the pit for our total measurement, our bright green line. Okay, then we give them an opportunity to practice that. And then same thing with the three-face knots. This one's a little difficult to learn out in the shed. We define the space between the edge of the knot and the edge of the piece as the gap. The proportion of the knot on the edge is the proportion of the gap we're going to use for our total measurement. We explain that in detail, give lots of examples, and then they have lots of practice here. And then they can measure and see if they've got it. And then we do the wide face spike knot, which is one of the trickier ones. And then we allow them to practice here. And then when we get to the end, we actually have built an animation to kind of sum it all up. Okay, here's the bright green line again is showing what their total measurement is. That's what they're going to use to grade the lumber. They're going to compare this total measurement to the width of the piece. Okay, so we show us the deeper the knot goes in the piece, the more of the white face we use. When it's all the way through, we use all of it, both sides for simple knots. And then we just go through a whole series of knots so they can look back and forth and see, again, the illustration of what they just learned. Okay? This would take just hours and hours of shed coaching to get all that across. This quiz is a short one. There's about 10 questions in there, multiple choice and true and false. Okay? Then once we understand how to measure the different shapes of knots, we're going to teach them how to use this total measurement technique. This isn't only for graders. This is for anybody buying lumber, selling lumber, using lumber. You can look at it. If you understand how this technique works, you can look at the knots and decide what grade they are without measuring anything. These are going to be our total measurement rules. These are back of a downloadable ebook that has the limits for the edge knots and combination knots. We talk about comparing it to the width of the piece, and combination knots are going to be wood left on the width or knot measurement over. Okay, so we explain again here what the total measurement is divided by 2. It's going to give us the knot size. Okay, and step by step what the total measurement rules are for edge knots, what they are for combination knots. We explain what we mean by wood left and total measurement over in these tables. Okay, if they memorize these tables, they don't even have to know the knot sizes any longer. And we explain why this works, because you're actually estimating how much wood is left, which is smaller than trying to estimate how much total knot you have or trying to average the knot in your head. Okay, lots of examples here. What's the total measurement? If they get it correct, it tells them they're correct. And again, the rules are available to them on every page. And this is also interactivity in the lesson that's not tested on. Okay, lots and lots of examples here. Get their confidence up. Okay. And then after that, we actually give them a chance to practice within the course before taking any of the knot tests. When they complete the practice session in this lesson, we, oops, I forgot to play the knot. We actually encourage them to take the knot test for the first time after they complete this lesson. Now, what this will do here is we'll play the video clip, look at the knot from all angles, and then we click Show Me, and it'll show this side of the knot needs to be measured, this side on phase 2 because the knot takes the full width. We show how both sides is less than 2/3 of the face, so it'll make it number 2. And they can go through each one, face 1, face 2, the edge, and the total measurement. It's going to be number 2. Okay, there's just a ton of examples in here. We do the same thing for every one. Okay, play the knot, and then show the total measurements. Okay? So once they finish this lesson, they're ready to take, for the first time, the video knot test. And all of the rules, which I failed to show you, that are in this lesson are also incorporated in those knot tests that I showed you at the beginning. It shows the total measurement limits for each one in a different format than what's on the card, but the same exact rule. Okay? Then we also cover the rules for prime, select structural and studs, and those again can be added or subtracted to the course. And then there's a short summary at the end. The last section we have in the course is called a knot review, where the student can actually review knots by grade. Okay? Now, one way this is helpful is if you have the student look at number 3 knots first, he can see that these are quite large. Okay? And he can look at hundreds of them. Pull up the rules. And then after he's looked at number 3, what we encourage him to do is look at some number 1 knots. And he can see that there is a drastic difference in the size here. Okay? And he can actually start to get a feel for what size knots go in what grade without even knowing anything about how to measure them or limit them. Okay? The number 2 knots are going to be in between. Okay? This works particularly well on the edge knots. Okay, so in summary then, the whole idea here is to shorten the training cycles and to train the grader more thoroughly. You're still going to have to incorporate shed coaching if the candidate's going to be grading on the chain. Okay. You can also use the course to screen for grader candidates. You can eliminate people quickly. If they can't get through the initial course material, you're probably wasting your time. Okay? And because we'll be able to train the grader in a shorter time frame, he's going to get up to speed quicker, and he's going to have less above grade and less trim loss, because when they're not sure, they have a tendency to cut it off or high grade it. Okay? The sooner you can eliminate that, the better. And that could add up to be tens of thousands of dollars in savings just in one training cycle. Okay? If you can improve your existing graders with the course by filling in gaps in knowledge by having them take this as a refresher, just a 1% improvement on 200,000 board feet of lumber on 100,000 board feet of lumber is worth about $200,000 a year. So anything you can do to improve your graders is immediate payoff for you. Now remember, the rules review section and the knot section can be used for evaluation purpose also, where you can evaluate quickly what your QC techs monitoring the machine or your experienced graders, whether they know all the rules and whether they know how to apply the knot grading techniques properly and can call the grade of a knot without having to measure the knot. Okay, if you're sales or support staff, if you're a buyer or an end user of the lumber, by going through this course, you'll have a much deeper understanding and appreciation of how all these defects and characteristics are actually graded, how they're measured, how they're limited. I've run into salespeople that think the grade of the piece of lumber is based upon how good the piece looks. Remember, the dimension lumber rules were based primarily on strength. How do the defects and characteristics affect the strength of the piece, not so much on appearance. Okay, so you should be able to actually determine the grade of a piece of lumber yourself after going through the course, which can help you in your sales and marketing of your material, with customer complaints, just a whole host of better, deeper understanding of the course. Okay, I went through that pretty quickly. I don't know, Luke, am I on time frame here?
No, you're doing well.
Okay.
Are you ready to jump in? We only have 2 questions.
Okay, that's fine.
The first one, well, they're both from Chris Rollins. His first question is, do the courses cover other grade types like decking, boards, and timbers?
No, not at the present time. We'd like to get to that point at some point in the future, okay? The, you know, the time and money investment in this is quite a bit. It takes a long time to produce this kind of material. So the biggest demand, of course, is for dimension lumber, that being the most prevalent product produced in the West Coast and Canada for southern pine mills. So no, we don't, but at some point in the future, we hope to.
Okay. He also asked, what type of tools do you offer to more experienced graders?
Tools for more experienced graders. Well, what I tried to point out there is we have the downloadable ebook with the shorthand rules, and which are different than the normal rule books that the grading agency gives out. These are more focused on the worst possible case for the rule. And also we have the total measurement rules on the back of that, which I've never seen anywhere else outside of this course, okay? The experienced graders can get through the lesson content relatively quickly. They can go over the material they think they know, and if there was something in the lesson that they missed, the course will catch them and remediate them on just what their individual weaknesses are. So you can have them go through the lesson content once, see if they can produce a 100% score on the rules, which you might be surprised. Experienced graders think they know all the rules all the time. Lots of times they're misapplying rules. For example, I remember watching a grader on a chain cut 4 feet off a 20-foot 2x4 that had wane that was approximately 2/3 the face, or 3/4 the face, and I asked him why he cut it off, and it was a number 3 2x4. And he said, well, that wane wouldn't make number 3. And I said, how much wane's allowed? And he said, 2/3 the face. And I said, no, 3/4. He said, no, 2/3. So we got out the book, and he saw he was wrong. And that's the kind of thing he trims off. It goes to the round table. Everybody thinks he cut it off in number 2. No one knows it's a mistake. It never shows up in the lumber, okay? Those are the kind of things that by making sure your experienced graders actually do know all the rules all the time, and then have them take one knot test in each category that they grade. And that will immediately show you where they're having difficulties. For example, some guys can grade edge knots on a 2x4 just to the very precisely, okay? And when they get on combination knots and 2x12s, they're lost, all right? And you can identify that quickly just by using those sections in the course.
Another question by Darwin Threat. Is there any MSR materials?
No, there is not at this point.
Okay. That is it. Let me see if I can make myself the presenter real quick. Let's see, can we hit OK on that?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. I'm going to go to, if you have any questions about the e-learning program, you can go to spib.org. Under Our Services, click on e-learning. All the information you would need to know about the course is here. You can see down here, are you ready to enroll? And also here to see pricing in the course syllabus, you can click. If you have any other questions, email us at spib@spib.org or chuck.miceli@spib.org. I think that's all we have. Chuck, anything else?
No, if anybody needs to have a more thorough presentation or another presentation, we can do a GoToMeeting. We can set up a GoToMeeting.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.